When someone mentions game shows to you, what comes to mind first?
Let's play Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? So, 2 questions away. You still have that 50-50 lifeline? $1 million at stake here. Here we go for $500,000. Let's play. Skibbity dub dub yes yes. Is it A, skibbity W re re, skibbity rubble woo re re, or C, skibbity mama who re re, or D, ra ra ah 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 roma roma ma?
What about the tacky, colorful, well-lit up Hollywood sets? Maybe it's the exciting chance to win a large jackpot of money that could potentially change your life. Or how about the torture or the embarrassment that'll stay with you for the rest of your life, that'll give you PTSD until your last day on this earth? Wait, is that right? Well, in case you haven't heard, Japan has that all covered. Japan is no stranger when it comes to bizarre and weird game shows. They aren't anything like westernized game shows where you're just put to the test of your knowledge or put through some kind of lame challenge. No, of course not. Japan needs to take it to the next level. They need the shock value. Is it even a show worth watching if you don't get mummified to the point where you go through claustrophobia from just losing a challenge? Or how about knocking yourself out from hitting your head on slippery as stairs against 5 other people at the same time? Even if and when we do try to recreate these in the Western world, they're just not the same. It's just not the same energy. And just like a lot of other things, no one can do it like the Japanese can. Now, the Western world is pretty familiar with Japanese game shows, I would say. Most of us do realize that they are pretty wacky and crazy. In fact, some of those Japanese shows did make it over to the US, and you may even remember some of them growing up. I remember growing up as a child in my household, me and my parents would watch a show called MXC, or Most Extreme Elimination Challenge. Where that extra E goes, I don't know. Admittedly, watching some episodes back, it does seem maybe a little bit controversial. It was a real Japanese game show that ran in the 80s called Takeshi's Castle. 2 teams would compete in several different physical challenges for points, and whoever had the most points at the end of the show won. It was then brought to the US in the early 2000s on cable television. But this US version had repurposed dubs, which is just kind of a nice way of saying fake dubs.
Of the 12, addiction is a disease. Right, Captain?
Contestants, how many of you consider addiction a disease?
Oh, yeah, I'm for that.
Yeah, well, that's a load of crap. Addicts are worthless and weak. That's called tough love.
I consider myself worthless, and I'm weak.
The dubbing was absolutely fake. It had nothing to do with what they were actually saying. They were just trying to make it funny for the Western audience. Usually ridiculous, sometimes controversial, but that is what made it funny. Another show you may be familiar with that was actually re-inspired from a Japanese variety show is Silent Library. This was copied and originally from a Japanese TV show called Gaki no Tsukai, but was made into a full-on TV show for the US. This aired during the golden era of MTV. And it did have a pretty successful run between 2009 and 2011. The idea of the game was that there'd be 6 players that would sit at a table in a library. Since it's a library, they do have to stay quiet and they do whisper. On the table in front of them all, there are 6 cards laid face down, so 1 for each of them. Each of them will grab a card and it'll either say safe or punishment on the card. If you receive a punishment card, of course, just as it sounds, you do get a punishment challenge. Now, you do have to complete the challenge, but you also have to stay completely quiet while you're doing it. If you do make too much noise or don't complete the challenge, your team will lose that round and therefore lose some money. The punishments are sometimes painful and sometimes funny to the point that it's almost impossible to stay quiet. This show was really popular on MTV, and they even had some really big guest stars like the Jersey Shore cast and Justin Bieber.
Justin Bieber? But
what none of these shows had, whether it was Japanese or Western, was the pure cruelty of Susunu Denpa Shonen.
続いてはこちら
Susanoo Denpa Shonen, or Denpa Shonen for short, means don't proceed. Crazy youth, which may seem like a weird name for a show until you watch it and see the ridiculous stunts that these people are put in order to gain fame and money. Like, literally, don't proceed. It had a pretty good run on Japanese television in between 1998 and 2002. And at its peak, it had 70 million viewers a week. That's like the population of Ohio. The show ran through several different challenges, each one being completely different from each other. They would be multiple episodes, and sometimes a single challenge could last up to a year or a year and a half. It really just depended on how long it took the contestant to finish the challenge, or even some give up. Although a lot of the challenges were horrific and quite controversial, it actually garnered some of the highest ratings ever on Japanese television. And one of the most well-known challenges, and arguably one of the most cruel challenges that they had, was Denpa Shonen's A Life of Prizes. This specific challenge in the TV show was covered in a documentary called The Contestant, and I highly recommend checking it out. Spoiler alert! If you do want to watch it, I recommend skipping to this time right here. That way you can skip the details if you plan on watching it. Denpa Shonen was notorious for auditioning only aspiring amateur comedians that wanted nothing more than just fame. It was a genius manipulation act, to be honest. They took these vulnerable women and men and put them in some of the most dangerous and ridiculous and embarrassing situations. Life and Prizes was no different. They auditioned a young amateur comedian that went by the name Natsubi, which literally means eggplant in Japanese. No, not for the reason you may be thinking. Get your head out of the gutter. Kids bullied him when he was younger, saying his face was long and shaped like an eggplant. I kind of feel sorry for this guy, and I really do, but at the same time, he continued to go with this name for the rest of his life. Can you imagine if you just stuck with the name like Banana Head for the rest of your life until old age? So ultimately, Natsubi got picked for this Life and Prizes challenge. He wasn't told in the audition what he would be doing for this challenge or any at all what it would entail. He was just thrown into a small one-bedroom studio apartment and told to strip naked. In this room was just like a sink for water, a simple stove top, a table, and a rack of hundreds of magazines. His challenge was to start with absolutely nothing, including his clothes. That's why they made him strip naked, and could not leave the room until he won 1 million yen worth of prizes through these magazines. These magazines would have contests that he could fill out a postcard and send out through the mail. He was completely cut off from the world. No human interaction whatsoever. No TV, no phone, nothing. Nada. Just these magazines. Now, if that wasn't exciting enough to you, here's the real kicker. It was all being filmed, all of it, 24/7, live streamed. And this was not explicitly told to Natsubi. He thought it would totally be rebroadcasted at a later date. In fact, I believe they even told him that it may not even air at all.
So don't worry.
And let's not forget that he was completely naked. This is already getting so cruel, and this is just the beginning of it. Since he was naked and this was being live streamed, they couldn't just show his little ding dong. So what did they do? Of course, they covered it up with an eggplant emoji. And this was before emojis were even a thing in 1998. A fun fact, in the documentary The Contestant, a BBC correspondent that reported throughout this whole TV show mentioned that this may be the very first time that the eggplant emoji originated. Way ahead of their time in 1998. What's wild is, since this was live streamed, they were trying to put the emoji over his private parts live, so they had to have joysticks that would move the eggplant along his private parts. This sounded like a Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson Super Bowl incident waiting to happen. So remember, they gave him nothing, right? Even took his clothes. So that does include food as well. This guy basically starved for weeks until he was able to win any kind of food. And it was easy to spot on the show. He was becoming skin and bones and losing weight like crazy. The staff was oh so kind to give him crackers in between days where he wouldn't have food because if he didn't eat and he starved, they wouldn't have a TV show, right? Eventually, he did win some food. One of his first prizes was a bag of rice. Not filled with the most amount of nutrients that you need, especially since he's been lacking and starving, but it is high in carbs and it did get the job done at least. He didn't have any pots or pans, so he was just eating this straight raw, like just hard rice. Raw rice. Crunching away on that. Actually, I have a confession. When I'm making spaghetti, sometimes I like to take a couple pieces of the raw spaghetti and just crunch on it, raw, the hard spaghetti pieces. Does anyone else do that? Am I just a weirdo? Comment below if you're a freak like me and you do this. I wanna know if I'm the only one or not that does this. But anyways, eventually he was able to makeshift some kind of pot, I guess, or bag to be able to hold the rice and water, and he just held it above the stove so that it would warm up, or had some kind of makeshift way to keep it held up. Absolutely genius. Give this guy an engineering degree if he doesn't have it already. This actually definitely saved his life, or at least saved him from being able to just eat hard raw rice for weeks on end. Eventually the rice would run out, but thankfully here and there he would win some other food, but it would of course always go out quickly. It was a continuation of having food some days and then starving for another few. At one point he did win a few bags of kibble and was living off of those for quite a while. Pretty awful stuff, although he did seem to enjoy it. Maybe he's on to something. Oh, why did... Huh. Okay, yeah, never mind. Please don't try that. that was not good. That was not good. So this was all illusion, desperation, survival, but at what cost? The editing of the weekly comprised shows, so the non-live stream shows, really made it seem like it was just another funny thing. So funny to watch a man starve and quite literally go mad. Hundreds of Japanese people laughing in a live studio audience and millions more at home. I will admit it's easy to fall for this with the funny sound effects and the quick editing to his insanity. If you watch closely though, you can really see how completely miserable he is. Now, at any moment he could have left. The door was left unlocked, and I think that probably was for legal reasons, and he did know that it was unlocked. But in some cruel, manipulative way, he just wasn't leaving. Almost like as if he was under hypnosis of the promise of fame and money. Stockholm Syndrome, if you will. As days, weeks, months went by, he did win several different things over time from these magazines, but pretty much most of them or all of them were useless to him. This included things like toys, a TV, tires, and he even won a PlayStation at one point. Oh, but a TV, that sounds wonderful, especially after being cut off from the world for several months. No. You didn't think they were gonna let him off that easy, did you? They want to keep him completely isolated. Of course they didn't give him satellite or an antenna to know what was going in the world. Also, Natsubi had no idea this was being live streamed. He thought maybe this would be aired at a later date, and they definitely didn't want him knowing that. That would completely change his attitude towards and inside the show. And that's just not entertainment. This somewhat reminds me of a TV game show that I used to watch in the mid-2000s, completely underrated, called Solitary, where they had several players confined into a small white confinement room alone.
Hello, my name is Val. Welcome to a unique social experiment designed to push 9 humans to their absolute physical, mental, and emotional breaking points.
Give me the pizza now.
This show was honestly so good, and I highly recommend checking it out. But there are big differences between this show, Solitary, and a Denpa Shonen's A Life of Prizes. Everyone who auditioned knew what they were getting into. They were told ahead of time that they would be put into a confinement room for prize money. And they weren't forced to be naked. And they weren't live streamed 24/7 either. They were also given food at times and for challenges. It was much different. They were more so challenged on who could last the longest in this confinement and who could complete the challenges. A Life of Prizes was purely made for entertainment to make fun of Natsubi's struggles, pain, and embarrassment. The horrible part is, even after he completed the challenge of winning 1 million yen worth of prizes after an agonizing year, the show staff shoved him into a van blindfolded, then onto an airplane or a boat or something, because now he's in Korea. They didn't let him go home just yet. They gave him a nice stay at an amusement park. They took him out for his favorite KBBQ for dinner, like as if he's a child out of school on a holiday. And then, bam, he ends up back in a single room studio apartment. What do you know? And yes, with more racks of magazines.
Oh, the joy.
You'll never guess next what he had to do with all these magazines in isolation. Anyways, this all lasted over a 15-month period with Japan and Korea. He did eventually complete his challenge in Korea, and what do you know? They blindfold him again. They throw him into a van and a plane, and he's in Japan now. Thank goodness. Little did he know, or maybe he did expect it, he was thrown again yet into another small 1-bedroom studio apartment. But this time, this room was on a stage in front of a whole live studio audience. He was blindfolded, put into the room, so he had no idea. And just like the other 2 instances, as soon as he got into the room, he actually immediately just started stripping down naked without even being asked. So sad. Incredibly sad. And as he was starting to get himself situated in the room, was starting to look at the magazines, all of a sudden, the walls come down completely. It wasn't a real room. He had no idea. Completely naked. Didn't even know that people had been watching him over the last year and a half. You can imagine the complete shock on this guy's face. The embarrassment, the confusion. The audience is clapping and cheering him on. It's extremely hard to watch. I can only imagine the amount of trauma that he got from this experience, and it probably stayed with him for the rest of his life. Not to be mentioned that it affected him mentally and socially so bad that when he got off the stage, he immediately didn't know how to hold a conversation, which is kind of ironic because now he had all this fame. Immediately he was getting interview after interview. He was guest starring on TV shows. The most up part is during this whole experience, he had these blank journals that they gave him, and they gave him a pen to write in. And because this was the only way for him to let his feelings out, let his emotions out, he had no one to talk to. So he constantly wrote in these journals. And what did they go and do with these journals? They sold them at public bookstores. And it was a hit, all while he didn't even know that he was being watched. His journals, while he was still in the room, were being sold, and he didn't get a single penny from this either. Thankfully, in the end, Natsubi did go on to do great things, and great things for his community in Fukushima as well. Like I said, I highly recommend checking out the contestant documentary if you haven't already. It does also go more in depth about Natsubi's life after the TV show. As A Life in Prizes came to an end, there were many more challenges that came out of Denpa Shonen. This was just the start of many controversial moments within the TV show. Another popular challenge segment of Denpa Shonen was a hike across Africa and Europe. Hitchhiking challenges were a typical segment that Denpa Shonen had ran in the past on Sunsune Denpa Shonen, Sunsunu Denpa Shonen's predecessor. This challenge was actually aired at the same time that Natsubi's A Life of Prizes was shown, although it wasn't quite as popular as that one. This challenge involved Takashi Ito, an amateur comedian from Japan, and Chuyan, a DJ from Hong Kong. The two were dropped off in the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa and had to hitchhike their way all the way through Africa and Europe, all the way to the northernmost part of Norway. There was just one catch, of course. They could not use their own money, so they started with no money at all. Since both of them were from two different countries, Japan and Hong Kong, they really didn't know each other's languages and couldn't communicate too well. Thankfully, Takashi was fluent in English and Chuyan knew just enough English to get by, but they did have some trouble communicating here and there.
Music. I don't know. What are you talking about? I don't know. You want?
Yes.
Low WC, okay?
Yeah, okay.
Low shower, okay?
Okay.
한다요. Ah.
Like, just enough. They were barely able to understand each other. As the name suggests, the two would hitchhike across the countryside, and thankfully they would get some friendly people who would give them a ride across, and there would be some motels that would graciously allow their stay to be able to have a bed for the night. Their journey across South Africa to Kenya actually went pretty smooth, other than the struggle to be able to get enough food some days in their stomachs. Once they reached Kenya though, there were quite literally roadblocks because of war and security reasons. It was just too dangerous for them to be able to continue their journey within Kenya. The show staff eventually did create a public poll with the consensus that they should allow them to fly to the next safe spot. I guess they did have enough people interested in the show to vote for them to continue. They decided South Sudan was the next plausible area and safest area for them to fly next to. In Sudan, they decided to travel across the desert with camels, hundreds of miles. It was so hot and they had so little food that Takashi actually ended up going unconscious and fainting from dehydration. He did eventually gain consciousness, but it was a pretty scary thing to watch. Even the staff that was on hand didn't know if it was okay to keep filming or if they should stop. But eventually the two did end up in Europe, but at this point they were really starving. They hadn't ate a whole lot of food. They had to come up with an idea to be able to make money, so Chuan decided to do watercolor painting. Where he got the money for paint and canvases, I have no idea, but it did work. He was able to sell them and did make just enough money to be able to eat. But once they reached Finland, they weren't able to sell any more of the paintings. Nobody wanted that you know, Scandinavian design. They know what's good. That's when they went on the longest streak for no eating, which was a whole 5 days. 5 days of no eating. I don't even know how they got around, to be honest. They had to figure out another way to make money again. They couldn't just starve like this, especially with how far they've gotten. So Takashi tried his hand at some questionable street performances. I don't even know if you could qualify this as a street performance, but there were some people who graciously gave their money to him, maybe because he was so crazy they just wanted to help him and get him off the street. But it was enough to earn them both a hamburger. Eventually they did make it their way from Finland to Norway to the northernmost part. But in evil Denpa Shonen fashion, they got all the way there and didn't get exactly what they were promised, which was a chance to have a live broadcast from the most famous lighthouse at the northernmost point of Europe. Now, in the middle of the broadcast, though, they were guided outside towards the harbor to a swan boat for some reason, which was never really concluded what happened after that because they just completely cut the film after that. People were making up all kinds of theories online about what this could mean and why they just abruptly ended this challenge this way, but eventually it came out to be to promote their next segment of challenges, which was called Swan's Journey. But as you'll see as a continuing theme with Denpa Shonen, they did not plan this out very well, the next set of challenges. They actually ended up running a bunch of filler episodes behind the scenes of this last challenge. This sounds worse than a Naruto filler episode. While this challenge wasn't exactly the most cruel one that Denpa Shonen did, it did still put the contestants in some really dangerous situations, putting them in countries that they shouldn't be, where there's war and security issues, also to the point where they're starving even up to 5 days, and even Takashi being completely hydrated, having to go to the hospital at some point. If anything, it's kind of like a more lamer and extreme version of The Amazing Race. So as I had just mentioned, at the end of the hitchhiking series, they were led to a swan boat, which was meant to promote the next Swan series that they were gonna do. This brought on another popular challenge called Denpa Shonen's Deserted Island Escape, in which it was the first of its installment. It's, well, exactly as it sounds. One day, a famous comedy duo called Armenia was asked by the producers and staff of the show if they would like to have a meal. And who would say no to that? They were big shots and famous in the television world. But as no surprise, they were blindfolded again and kidnapped and, well, put on a deserted island. This show was literally starting to be known for their blindfolds and kidnapping people for these challenges. That was the main theme of the show. So their challenge was they needed to get off this island. So in order to do that, they needed to be able to build their very own raft and, of course, escape the island with that raft. Somehow, by a miracle, they were able to build a makeshift raft and able to get all the way to mainland Japan. But of course, that's not all. They can't leave it that easy. This is where the swan boat comes in. They were told that they needed to make their way to Tokyo by this swan boat. This took them over 2 months just to get to Tokyo. Once they got to Tokyo, they were told, no, wait, you need to go to this TV show over in Sendai, which took them another 2 months. All of this being in the swan boat. Then again, this comedy duo, Armenia, was told that they needed to go to India for another TV shooting. Guess what? Not real. Another theme you see of cruelty on this show is that Denpa Shonen really takes advantage of the fact that they're in the showbiz. They know a lot of these people really want this fame. They want the TV interviews. They want to be known. They want their name to be known. But you think these people would learn and pick up from their tricks after all this time, but they don't. They continue and keep going forward. Maybe it's for the bit, maybe it's funny, maybe they don't mind, but honestly, they do seem miserable because this goes on for over a year or two. So they did make their way to India for that TV show, right? But then they were told, actually, wait a second. It's not in India, it's in Indonesia. You heard me wrong. And if you look at a map, it's really not obvious how to get from point A to point B from India to Indonesia. Of course, that also couldn't be that easy because all of this has been so easy. There were areas between India and Bangladesh and Myanmar that were not possible for boat travel, so they actually had to hitchhike, which eventually led them to being detained in Myanmar and deported to Thailand since filming apparently was not allowed. And just like Natsubi, A Life of Prizes, this took a year and a half to do. This show just knows how to completely waste people's time through cruelty and embarrassment and pain. I could go on and on over all these different ridiculous challenges that this TV show had over time. Psychics? Yep. Contestants had to guess a specific card out of 5 in order to eat a meal that day. Have a favorite baseball team? They can ruin that for you too. If you're such a loyal fan, then you'll be willing to lose a meal if your team loses a game that day. And you will not eat until they win a game, even if that means they do lose a game and they're off from playing for a few days. Hope you're okay with starving for those days. In fact, there seems to be a universal theme around all these challenges, and that's punishing you through starvation deprivation. Honestly, that's just cruel in of itself. And what do you know? This show eventually did get canceled because it was deemed as a torture show by the Japanese government. Thank goodness. It only took 4 years. As mentioned before, and I just really want to make sure this gets out there, I highly recommend checking out the Contestant documentary. I believe it's on Hulu in the States. It's a really great watch, and it's what inspired me to look more into this TV show. It can be a bit hard to watch at times because it is so cruel, but it does end on a good note. Let me know down below in the comments if you plan on watching it or if you've already seen it. Let me know what you think. Do you think this show took it too far? Do you think it's cruel to play and manipulate people like this for fame? And lastly, I would like to thank everyone who supported me in the last video. You all really mean a lot to me. And I especially want to give a shout out to my parents for recommending me to watch this. And as always, like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that bell notification to be let known when my next video comes out. Love you all. Bye.